Yo, what's up guys, it is Bloxd API, and I made a poll on my channel asking you guys if I should make a coding tutorial, and like 90% of you guys said yes. Now I know that most Bloxd players don't really care about coding, but since 90% of you guys just chose that you want to learn, you know what, I'll make a quick tutorial. Bloxd coding actually isn't that hard to learn, but that's just in my personal opinion. If you're young, which most Bloxd players are young, like I don't know the average age of Bloxd players, but probably around 10 years old, so it might be a bit difficult, but it's definitely user friendly. Coding isn't that bad at all, but I'm gonna start off with this coding tutorial, and it's gonna be like a series because I can't really add everything about coding in one singular video, but this video will be teaching you about the basics. And don't get me wrong, you can do a lot with just the basics, and probably what most of you guys are looking for is just the basics anyways, but it's not going to be enough to code like ranked bedwars or ranked skywars or anything. But let's get into it. Now first of all, I have to teach you guys some JavaScript fundamentals. Now this stuff is like, in Bloxd, when you're coding, you obviously want the code to interact with the game, right? If you're coding ranked bedwars, you might want to teleport a player somewhere, but these fundamentals don't really interact with the game that much, but they're very important to learn, so do not just skip it. So first of all, this might be your first time ever using a code block, so you can just go in creative and get it. It's not that hard, and you have to be in creative mode, I believe, to edit a code block. You can't be in survival even if you're the world owner, which is good in my opinion, because I can play my own ranked bedwars without accidentally deleting my code. But once you're on it, you probably have no clue what to type here. You can't just type random stuff, because if you do that, it will probably say an error. Well, yeah, it says an error there. It's not going to do anything, but let's say you want to type something into the chat, and this is useful. It's the first thing to learn, and it's really easy. So API.log, and then whatever you want to type. If you have a word, like let's just say word for an example, then you have to put it in quotation marks or it won't work. You can do like the double quotations like this, or you can do single quotations. It doesn't really matter, and you can even use these fancy quotations, but I won't use those. But basically what this does is outputs the word, like it just outputs word in the chat, as you probably expect. Now you're probably wondering, why did we type API.log? Basically, for many reasons, you can't just type letters and then have it output in the chat, but API is like Bloxd's built-in functions pretty much. So this is like a built-in Bloxd function. So all you need to know is whenever you're doing stuff in Bloxd, lots of the times you have to do API, unless it's in like default JavaScript, but basically just API.log and then whatever you're saying. I know it sounds complicated, and it's a lot of memorization, but like I didn't memorize all of the Bloxd commands. You can always Google them up, and let me show you where to Google them. So if you go on the GitHub of Bloxd, I'll probably have a link in the description to the GitHub and the link to this world that I'm using. You can just scroll through basically every command. Now the API is hard to read if you don't know how to do it, but for an example, it says right here you can use API.log for printing and debugging, so if you want to print stuff into the chat. And all of the other API stuff, I'll show you about this later. But yeah, you can see all of your code, because you're obviously not going to memorize every single thing about the coding language, so you can just refer to it here. But let's say instead of, let's get to learn this function a little bit better. Let's just do 4 plus 4. Now what do you guys think is going to happen? Will it just type 4 plus 4, or will it type 8? Now I'll actually type 8, but what if you just want to type 4 plus 4? So basically, since there's no quotations, it just typed the number value of this, right? The numerical value. If you don't want it to be numerical value, then you have to do quotation marks, yeah? So it shows you that. Now something interesting that I will say is, I'm pretty sure if you do 5 in quotation marks plus something like 0, I think it should do 50, yeah. Which is really counter-intuitional to what most of you guys think, but the plus sign isn't just for math in coding. Like if I do, let's say 5, then it just combines the two letters. Like if I do hello and then world, it will combine them, right? And it won't put a space between them or anything. So if I want to do a space, I have to do that. So when you're doing like 3 plus 3 and one's in quotation, it just combines them together, right? And you might be like, well, what if I want you to do just 3 plus 3? Now, obviously, you could remove the quotations. But if you can't, you can do minus a negative, I believe. That's what I do a lot. There's lots of ways to do it. I think, yeah, and then it does 6. Now, it's a bit complicated. I think there's probably better ways to do it. Like, for an example, I think what most people do is they just minus the quotations. Yeah, that works too. But it's a bit complicated, okay? But I'm just telling you guys everything you need to know. But yeah, all you really need to know is if you want to type something into the console, then you can just do that. And it will show, I believe, it just shows to the player activating it. I actually don't know if it shows the message to everyone, so let me check. Okay, so I have my alt account on, so let me just click this. And it does not show it. Okay, it only shows the API.log to whoever clicked the code block, so that's very good to know. So yeah, as you might expect, it only happens to the person who clicked it. Now that's pretty much all you need to know about the console. It's obviously not very useful, and you might be like, bro, I want to learn stuff that's actually useful, but just bear with me. Okay, variables, okay? Now the easiest way for me to explain this is variables is like data, kind of. Like for an example, let's say I make a variable, and to make a variable you have to type let and then the variable name, so whatever you want the name of your data to be. So let's say let number and then equals and then whatever you want it to be. Now the equal sign is not like the math exactly, it just means, well, it kind of is like the math. It means they're the same, okay? It means when you like are talking about number, you're referring to this. So if I then do api.log, and then if I just print the number 3 as I showed you before, it'll just do 3. And this line of code isn't in the chat or anything, right? But let's say instead I do api.number. And if I do this, then it will say 3 in the chat, yeah. But if I do it in quotation marks, of course, then it'll just treat this as a string. So it'll treat it as like a word, you know, instead of a variable. So variables never have quotation marks, okay? And the good thing about variables is you can change data with it. Now, obviously, you could do like number, let's say number equals 6. So first of all, when you're making the variable, you have to use let, but after that, you only have to do the variable name and then equals and then whatever you want it to be, okay? And variables don't just have to be letters. It could be like, I don't know, the letter, it could be the word hello, yeah? Even though the variable name is number, but I'll just change the variable name to data so it's not confusing, okay? It's a variable, guys. Now, if you're wondering what, does it matter like what this initial value is? But it really doesn't matter, okay? Because like I'm changing the value of data right after. If I like, you can log 2 different things, by the way. I probably should have told you that before, but let's say I log data first, which is equal to hello, and then I log the number 7, then it'll just show them both right after each other. But let's say I should log data before I change it and then after I change it, okay? So I let data is equal to 3 and then I log it and then I change it and then I log it again. As a lot of you expect, it'll say 3 first and then it'll say hello. And this is because Bloxd reads the code top from bottom, generally. Like 99% of the time, but not really with functions and stuff like that. So yeah, now with variables, often when you're changing them, you want them to like, let's say you want to just add 1 to this variable, okay? So what you can do is data equals data plus 1. So what this will do is it'll increase data by 1 because it's data is equal to 3. So you're letting data equal to 3 plus 1, right? So it's now equal to 4, which is a bit weird, but you can use the variable statement itself in the like when you're declaring what it means, yeah? So this will console.log 4. You can also do data plus equals 1, so you're increasing it by 1. You can do whichever one makes more sense, but I think for beginners, it's probably easier to remember like this. So then it would equal 6, of course. And I actually haven't tried division that much. I know that sometimes division is weird, but let's say data equals data. When you're doing dividing, you want to do a slash, and multiplying, you want to do a star. So it's not like an X. Yeah, I should have said that before. It's kind of important, but you can do data equals data divided by 3, and then it should log 1. But let's say it's a decimal, just to try it out. Oh, wait, no. Okay, 4. Okay, so it does the decimal, and I think, yeah. so it just shows a lot of decimal points. So if I do it divided by 7, it will show, yeah, a lot of decimals. So Bloxd does work with decimals. Now if you're working with data that is, say, a word, then you can like add a letter to the end of it if you want. Now of course you could just make it equal to, like, I don't know, word add. You could turn it into that and then I'll just type that. But but you can do the same thing by doing data equals data plus and then add, and it'll look the exact same in chat. Because what this is doing, remember, plus sign doesn't always mean like you're adding numbers. In coding languages, it can also mean that you're like combining two words. And by the way, this is called a string. I'm just gonna call it a string now because it's like a string of letters, and it's a lot easier to call it that. Now obviously with variables, there's a lot you can do with it, and I'm going to show you most of the cool things that you can do with it later, of course, but for now this is all that you need to know. And obviously it's not useful. Instead of using a variable, you could just print it there. But trust me, it's very important to know what variables are, because without variables you can't really do much with the game. Alright, other data types. As I said, variables store data in it. And let me just show you another quick example that's very important. Let's say I let data, this is a variable name, equals 4. And then let's say I increase data by 1. And I'll just I'll do plus equals. So this increases data by 1. You can also do minus equals to decrease it by 1, and I'm pretty sure you can do divide equals. Can you? Let me test that. Yeah, you can. Okay. Let's do plus equals and then API dot log data. So now it's equal to 6, but you might be like, wait a second, data is equal to 6 now, so what if I just increase it by 2, right? That just doesn't work, okay? Basically what I'm saying here is whenever you exit the code block, the variables all get reset, okay? So if I let data equals 3 and then add 2, it's not going to be like 5, 7, 9, because it's not like a global variable. And also if I try to access the variable from a different code block, it won't work. So like here I can API.log data really easily, but here I cannot at all because it's not defined, right? You can't use variables in different code blocks, only the code block that you made the variable in, which makes stuff complicated, okay? For an example, if you want to have someone store a variable for how much elo I have, or how many points I have like I do in ranked bed wars, you can't just declare it in one code block, because then when you're trying to get the value of your points in another code block, it doesn't work. But that's a lot more advanced for now. So let me show you about other data types, okay? Variables are just one data type, kind of, right? You can do let data, and that's a type of data, right? But what if you want to have an array of numbers? Okay, I just said the word right now, but what if you want to have a list, kind of? Because the list is data, yeah? Like, what if instead of just storing one number or one letter or one word, you want to store multiple? So what you can do is what you can do is make an array. An array is basically a list, but it's called an array. So let's say we want the list to equal, this part is the same, right? We use the word let and then we make the variable, and then we want to put the list. So you might be like, oh, you just do 4 and then 5 and then 6, right? Let's say you want the list to be 1, 2, and 3, yeah? What you have to do is add square brackets at the front of it and the end of it. You just have to do it whenever you're making an array, okay? So this is essentially the same thing as making 3 variables, yeah? You have 3 variables that you can all use individually, but you do it all in one variable. And this is not always necessary. You might be like, well, why don't I just make 3 different variables? It's usually important if you have like infinite many data points, or if you just have a lot of them. Like, let's say you want to have one of these numbers for every single player in the lobby. You're probably not going to want to just use variable names, because that's very inefficient, right? But let me show you how this works, okay? Now if we log the list into the menu, it should just show the whole thing. Yeah, it just shows the whole array. But what if we only want to get a certain element, so a certain part of the array? and it's called an element, by the way. That's why I called it that. This is the first thing in the array, right? But it starts at 0. Okay, you might think that this is like the first, second, and third, but in coding it's like the 0th element, the first, and the second. And I did not make this coding language up, so don't complain to me. So if I want to get the first element from the list, I have to do list, okay, api.log list, but we also have to do in square brackets 0, so the first element, and then it'll just show 1 in the chat. And if I want to show the second element, then I will do 2, and if I want to do the third element, then I would put 2 right here. Now if you try to do an element that is not in the array, right? Because this, like, let's say we want to get the 100th element of the list. I did not make 100 elements, so it should just say like undefined, yeah, because we didn't define it yet. We could continue on making this list and then it would work, but as of now it doesn't work. Now I'm sure that a lot of you guys already know the importance of lists, but let's say we want to modify the list, right? Now if we want to change the first element of the list, which is currently 1, right? And remember 0, this is called the index of the array, like basically where it's at. The 0 represents the first element, yeah? So if you want to change the first element, remember this is the first element, we can do it like a normal variables. We can just change it to equal 7 instead, yeah? So what that'll do is the first element is now 7, of course, and if we want to log the whole list in the chat, then it'll be 7, 2, and 3, right? It doesn't change these 2 elements, which is really useful. Now there are lots of other things you can do with arrays, but I'm just going to show you the basics right now, and later on I'll show you more, because arrays are really, really important to use. Now let's say we do list and then the 7. So even though we don't have, and this actually refers to the 8th number, remember? We actually only have 3 numbers in the list instead of 8. So even though we haven't defined the letters in the numbers in between, it doesn't really matter, I believe. We can just do this normally. Yeah, there, it just shows 7. So you can like skip elements. I'm actually not sure, can you do negative? Why would you ever do this? I don't know. But yeah, it works. You can do that if you really want to, but I don't think you really would. Now what I am curious about is, what if we change the 7th element to 7 and then we console.log the list? Yeah, it'll show the whole list, but all of the things in between aren't defined yet, so they're null, which means nothing pretty much. Now conditions. Conditions are of course very important. Like, let's say you want to see if someone is playing a game, right? That is the condition, if someone is in a Bed Wars match. Or let's say you want to see if someone is located at spawn in Bloxd. That's also a condition. A condition is basically anything that may or may not be true, yeah? So let's say a very simple condition, and if you're saying a condition, you have to use if. So it's like if, and then you have brackets, and then inside the brackets you have to put the condition. So let's say you want to say if 2 is equal to 2. Now obviously 2 is equal to 2, but in coding you have to put 2 equals, okay? Because when we just use 1 equals like here, it means something else. It means you're defining a variable always, but in conditions you have to use 2 equal signs. You can also use 3, but 2 is just better because it doesn't compare variable types or whatever. So let's say if 2 is equal to 2, right? Now if 2 is equal to 2, it'll run all of the code that is here, okay? So let's say we have api.log 1. So of course 2 is equal to 2, so this code inside of here will run, yeah? And it will also run this. It said 1 and then 2. But what if we say if 3 is equal to 2? Now obviously this is false, so everything inside these brackets will not run, yeah? So that is, it's just saying nothing in the chat. And you can also like nest if statements, which means you can put them inside of each other. So let's say if 3 is equal to 2, and then if 2 is equal to 2. Predict what will happen, because this one's a bit harder. I don't know, maybe some of you guys will mess up, but what will output in the chat? You might think it'll say 3 in the chat, but it'll actually say nothing. And the reason why is because 3 is not equal to 2, so none of this code runs. It doesn't matter that this is true because it's not running this code in the first place. If we put the if statement outside of here, then it would run. And by the way, the spaces don't matter. You might have noticed I pressed tab to put a space, but that's just so it's easier to read, you know? It doesn't matter if I had no space, it would still work the same. But now it would console.log 3, obviously, because 2 is equal to 2. Now, normally you're not doing basic statements like if a number is equal to another number, because you already know if it's true, right? The only reason you'd want to use an if statement is if something is a variable. So let's make a variable real quick. Let's say if let data equals 3, okay? Now if data is equal to 3, remember you have to use 2 equal signs, okay? Do not forget that, guys. Then data plus equals 1, so it will increase data by 1 pretty much. You can also do data equals data plus 1, but I just like this more. And then after that, let's log data in the chat. Now, as you probably expect, it will log 4, right? It starts at 3 and then it adds 1, so it becomes 4. Now if we say data is equal to 4, then it'll just stay at 4, right? Because it ignores this code since data is not equal to 3. Same with everything else. If it's 2, it just stays at 2. Now with conditions, you don't just have if statements, okay? There's also other conditions you can do, thankfully. And there's also other operations. Like this is an operation, pretty much, I believe. It's something. I think they call it an operation, you know? But instead of just having an if statement, API.log1, we can also have an else. So you can't just have an else statement on its own, but like what it's saying is if data is equal to 3, it'll do this, basically, or if it's not equal to 3, then it'll do this code. So it's always going to do one or the other, pretty much. Now obviously data is not equal to 3 because it's equal to 2, so it'll do the bottom one. Yeah? It logs 2 in the chat. You can also do else if. So let's say if data is equal to 3, then it'll do this. Or if data is equal to, let's say 2, because our data is equal to 2, then it'll do this. It'll behave as the exact same way. So there's if statements, else statements, and else if. And you can have as many else if statements on top of each other, but you cannot just have one alone. Okay, like let's say I just go here and do else if. This shouldn't work probably. Else if data is equal to 4. Oh shoot, I messed up. I make mistakes too, okay? You have to use curly brackets on the end, but only circular brackets on the condition. Then let's say API.log3. Now it should say an error in the chat. Okay, it doesn't say an error basically because what it thinks you're saying is this. Okay, that's what it thinks you're saying, I believe. But if we like put something in between here, I don't know, let's just say placeholder, because it doesn't really matter. It shouldn't work. Yeah, it's a syntax error. I've never tried this before, so I wasn't 100% sure. But you basically have to use else if you already had a statement. So let's say if data is equal to 1, it'll say 1. If data is equal to 2, it'll say 2. And if data is equal to 3, it will say 3. But if it's none of them, you can put the else at the end. Then you can log not 1, 2, or 3. So here it says 2 because our data is 2. If we do 3, it will say 3. But if it's 7, then it is not 1, 2, or 3, which is very true. Very simple statement. Now we're almost at the end of our coding fundamentals and we'll actually be able to affect the game, and it'll be a lot more interesting because you can teleport players and do all of that stuff. So loops. Loops are very important. You probably know what they mean just by hearing the word. It's basically code that repeats itself, okay? Now let's say you want to type all of the numbers from 1 to 10. You obviously could do API.log1 and then, I don't know, copy and paste it a few times, 2, 3, 4, and keep going and go all the way up to 10. But that's a bit inefficient, okay? So we can use loops. Now I think the easiest loop to learn first, there's two types of loops, is the for loop, okay? So let's say for, and then we have to let a variable. I'll just type it out first and then tell you what it means. I know it looks a bit intimidating, okay, but it's not hard, trust me. And then there, that should work. So this is basically a for statement, okay? So what it does is you can make a variable here. Now traditionally you put I, but I'll just put variable because it's a variable, okay? To make it easier on you guys so you understand it, okay? So for variable is equal to 0. So this is the initial variable, okay? It's just making a variable, and I'll tell you why in a second, okay? And this is the condition, okay? As long as the variable is less than 10, it'll run the code that is in here, okay? And this increases the variable by 1, okay? So let me just quickly put, API.log variable, okay? So the variable is initially equal to 0, right? And then it runs this code since 0 is indeed less than 10, and then it'll API.log the number 0, right? But then since it's a loop statement, it goes back to the top and it checks the condition. So variable is equal to 0, but now it's increased by 1. The plus plus is just a fancy way of saying the variable is increased by 1. You can also do minus minus, but I'm going to do plus plus. Yeah, so now variable is equal to 2, and it'll log it in the chat again. If this is a bit complicated, then it's fine, but it shouldn't be that bad. Basically, you just have your variable, and then the condition, and then what happens every time you loop it. Now, if I do this, wait, variable name expect, oh yeah, I'm done. Since you're making the variable, you have to do let. You have to use the let statement, my bad, guys. Oh, I think the problem that I'm running into here is I'm using var, which is a bad variable name, okay? Basically, any other variable name works, so I'll just use data. Data, and then it should work? Yeah, it works. It was just very unfortunate that I decided to use a variable name var. Don't use really variable names that are already like in the coding language. Like don't use var as a variable name, don't use let. Don't use all of that stuff. Don't use API. Just use like kind of unique variable names, and then you won't run into problems. But what this does, of course, is it starts off at 0, okay, and then it logs 0 in the chat. And then what it does is it increases it by 1, and then it logs it again, and increases it by 1, logs it again, and it does that until this condition is false. So once we get to 10, 10 is not less than 10. 10, if I did less than or equal to, it would work. But since 10 itself is not less than 10, it does not print 10 in the chat. Now a simpler loop probably is the while loop, and what it does is it just loops something while a condition is true, okay? So let's say we have a variable, okay? And I'm gonna make my variable name data again. Let the number equals 1. I'm just gonna make a number, because why not? Now while number is less than 10, let's say. Actually, you know what? Let's just do 40, because why not? While it's less than 40, it will run this code pretty much. So if I just do API.log number, what it'll do is it'll print the number 1, and then it'll print the number 1 again, because 1 is smaller than 40, and it'll just keep doing that forever. So don't do that. It'll say an error in chat, because it's logging too many messages. It's tried its best, but it gave up, okay? But instead, what we do is every time it loops, let's increase number by 1, okay? So you can do number plus equals to 1, and then API.log, and then the number. So what it should do is, it says the numbers from 1 to 15, and there's no mistakes this time. Now that's pretty much all there is to if statements. Now obviously there's a lot more, to loops. Obviously there's a lot more stuff you can do with it than just this. But I think for the fundamentals, this is all you need to know for loops, and I'll probably tell you a lot more about them later and some interesting things. Actually, there is something interesting. Yeah, I'll say it. So let's say we have an array, okay, and I'm just gonna name the array, I don't know, number 6, okay? And I have to do equals, and let's say it's just like 1, 2, and 3, and 4, and 7, and 8. Just some random numbers, you know? Now we can also use a for statement, and then this is a bit more complicated, so you don't really have to know this, but we're making a variable, that basically is equal to each element of the array, okay? Now we don't have to tell the computer that we're making it equal to each of these elements, it just does that automatically. But this is an element of the array of numbers, yeah? So what this does is it'll repeat this code using every single element of this array, because remember, each of these is an element. 3 is an element, 4 is an element, 7 is an element, 8 is an element. So we'll repeat this code 6 times because there's 6 of them, right? And then let's say, I don't know, api.log and then element. Pretty easy. Then it'll say every single element in this array, and it's a pretty nice thing to do, in my opinion. You can also obviously do like element plus 1, and it'll do like 2, 3, 4, 5, 8, 9, and that's pretty much all there is to loops. Now functions. I don't really think this is that important to learn, but I'm gonna say it anyways, because if you're advanced, it's not that hard to learn, so I'm just teaching it now. But if you're advanced, it's kind of important to know. Now functions are pretty darn nice, and I'll show you why in a second after this, but basically they work using every code block, which has a really big advantage that I'll show you guys, probably not in this video, but like the next part of this series. But let me just delete this code, I was just testing, but functions are basically, they're kind of, I don't know how to explain it the best, but I'll just explain it like this. A function turns an input into an output, okay? So it's kind of like how if we have the number let data equals 0, and then we do data plus equals 1, it takes an input and it turns it into an output of the number plus 1, right? If we have data is equal to 7, the input is 7 and the output would be 8, because we're adding 1 to 7 and we'd get 8. But we can do this exact same thing with a function, and you might be like, well, why would you do it with a function if you can just do it like this? Functions can also do a lot more complicated stuff. But typically functions can't do anything that like if statements can't do, but it's just a more efficient way of doing so. So let's make a function. Now you start off by typing the word function, make sure it's spelled correctly, and then you have brackets. I mean these curly, actually no, I'm stupid. Okay, you have function and then you have the function name, okay? So let's just put the name is hello, okay? So this is a hello function, and then you have to put these curly brackets, and I'll show you why in a second, and then you use, these circular brackets, and then you use curly brackets. And what you can do is, let's say we want this function to, I don't know, just log 1 in the chat, okay? And by the way, api.log, well, let's do this. Now you might be like, oh, I'll type 1 in chat. It will not. This is just a function, but we haven't like used the function yet. To activate the function, pretty much, you have to type in the function name and then the parentheses, and then it'll say 1. And by the way, api.log is the same thing as console.log. I'm just way more used to using console.log, but just know that. So if I accidentally do console.log, it's just the same thing. But api.log, I'm just showing you this because Bloxd uses API a lot. But you might be like, well, this is useless. I could have just said api.log1 in the first place, which is true, but I'm just teaching you guys the fundamentals, okay? So bear with me. So let's instead make a different function that's a tiny bit harder. And this function is going to have something called a parameter. So let's say we want to make a function that will add 1. So it has to take an input, right? Because that's what a function does, as I told you before. The previous function did not have an input, but this one will. So let's say we input the number x, okay? Now what we do is we want to output the number, let's say we want to output the number x plus 1, yeah? So if we input the number 6, we output the number 7. You don't have to use x here, you can use anything. You can even use like any variable name pretty much, right? But what this will do is if we input 1, of course, it will output 2. So now let's call this function. You use the function name and then the parentheses. But this time you have to put an input, and this is where you put the input value into, okay? So you can do the input value of 7, and then, okay, it broke my code. It does that sometimes, it's a bit annoying. Sorry. Bro, it literally just cooked my code. I'm so mad right now. Why did it do this to me, chat? It's the add 1. So let's say we want to add 1 to the number 7. Bro, it cooked my code again, bro. I don't think it likes add 1. There might be like a swear word in it. I don't understand. Or let's just say add 1. It's not my fault, chat. Bloxd is just like that sometimes. It literally does that and it's so annoying. But let's say we add 1 to the number 7. Okay, now what this will do is output 8, of course, as you definitely expected, yeah? But let's say we want to take in 2 inputs. Don't do it like this. I mean, that won't work. Do like 2 different variable placeholders, and let's say we want to output the sum of them, right? So now if we want to do the sum of 7 and 3, it will output 10, right? And these 2 things are called parameters of the function, and it'll just basically do that. Now, of course, you can make functions more advanced than this, but the amazing thing about functions is for some reason you can access functions from any code block. Once you make a function in this code block, you can access it here, right? Which is just really, really nice. I don't know why, because you can't access anything else pretty much from different code blocks. You can't access any data, like any variables, but you can access functions, so that's pretty nice. So I'm just going to keep that function there. I'm going to change the function name just to add, because we're no longer adding 1 to any of it. And let's just do add, I don't know, 0.5 and 0.7, because why not? It works with decimals, of course. And the last thing is arrays, and I already showed you this, but I'm going to show you some important properties if you want to use arrays effectively. Now you can Google array functions pretty much to see all of the cool things you can do with them, but let me show you some. So let's let an array equal to, I don't know, 1, 2, 3, and 4, yeah? Now what if we want to find the length of the array? All you have to do is log the data and then dot length, and I'm pretty sure this is called an object, but all you need to know is dot length is what you can add to the end of an array, and it'll just output the length. So I'll output 4 because it's 4 long. Now keep in mind the last element does have an index of 3. That's a refresher, because this has an index of 0, 1, 2, and 3. So if you do this, it'll get the last element of the array pretty much. And also if you want to get the last element of the array alone, we have to get the index of the last element, which is always just equal to the length minus 1. So this is a bit more complicated, and I'll explain why it works. But this will output 4. Oh, it got rid of my code. Here we go. So basically this is the index, right? And if we want to get the last element in this example, this has to equal 3, yeah? And it does work in this example, right? Because it's just the length of this, which is 4, and then you subtract 1. But it works with any array. It's pretty easy to see why, so I won't explain it, and there's not much I can say, but it'll get the last element. Like let's say this is 8, then it'll get 8. So you always got to be smart and use things like this. So data.length is a really nice feature. But let's say we want to add something to the array. All you have to do is use something, sorry, not api.log. You gotta use data and then .push, okay? And what this will do is add something to the end of the array. If you want to add something to anywhere else in the array, it's a bit harder. But basically, let's say we want to push the number 7 to the end of the array. You do not have to put like comma 7. You just have to put the element name and it'll automatically put the commas, okay? So what this will do is if we add 7 to the end of the array and now we get the last element, then it'll obviously show 7, yeah? And if we output the whole array just so it's easier for me to see it, to show you guys, this is a whole new array. Now if you want to insert an element, it's a bit harder, but I think I'll show you anyways. But you have to use data.splice, and then let's say we want to insert an element in this position. Okay, so let's say we want to insert the number 7 right here, and then so basically it'll be 1, 2, and then the number 7, 3, 4, 5, 8. What we have to do is splice, and then we have to put on the index of where we want it to be, which is 2. And then how many elements we want to remove from the array, which is 0. And then I'm actually not 100% sure. Yeah, I guess this just works. So basically just put the where we want it to be, and then just put 0, and then put the array you want to add there. So if I want to add 100 in the second spot, which is actually the third spot, then you can do it here. And this works. And data.splice is also used to remove parts of the array. So let's say we want to remove starting here and then ending here. So like we start at the second index and then we end at the third index. I'm pretty sure, yeah, it'll get rid, sorry, I mean we start with the 3 and then we remove 3 elements, my bad guys. So it'd get rid of all of these because it starts here and it removes 3 of them. So then we have 1, 2, and 8. And I don't have like that many of these array things memorized, but you can Google them up by like Googling array functions. And there's a lot of nice ones, like I think this is used to combine 2 arrays, and there's also dot sort if you want to sort the array alphabetically, and you just have to use these brackets. So like I think I could just do data dot sort and then it'll put it alphabetically. So if I do data dot sort, then yeah, it'll sort the array from lowest to highest. Now keep in mind, I don't think it always works from lowest to highest, but let me see. First of all, let me scramble it out because it was already unorganized, but here. So what it does is it sorts it alphabetically, not really numerically. So it's a bit weird, but basically what it's doing here is it has the 1 and then it has the 2 and then like, well basically you see how the 1 is here, right? And 1 is smaller than 2, but it's just, it sorts it alphabetically, so it doesn't sort it numerically. If you want to sort it numerically, it's a lot harder to sort an array. You should use like bubble sort or whatever, I don't know. I think there's a built-in way to sort an array, but I don't know how because I'm not smart enough. But that is it for the coding fundamentals, so we can finally go on to the fun stuff, which is intro to Bloxd API. Now, we already used an API function, which was api.log, but basically API is anything that interacts with the game. I think is a decent way of explaining it. So what this did is it interacted with the chat, right? So if we want to teleport players anywhere, I don't know, give players items, anything like that, we have to use Bloxd API. Now, I showed you this website before. It is just a Bloxd GitHub, so you can search up Bloxd API or Bloxd GitHub to see it, and then there's 4 files, and just go to README. That is where we're currently at. And you can technically teach yourself coding from just this, but that's only if you already know how to code. If you have never seen coding before, this is all just probably gibberish to you. But for an example, what this means here, just ignore all of this, only look at like the purple. The purple is what the API is. So we would do api.getPosition, and then it shows you the position of an entity. So that's just how to use the API. I'll show you more about it later, but let me go back to showing you the Bloxd API. Now, this is not just coding in general, this is only for Bloxd, but every single player, actually every single entity, has a unique ID, and the ID changes when you relog on the server, but it's basically a number that identifies you. So if I just do api.log and then my ID, which is a built-in function, yeah, then it'll tell you what your ID is. And my ID is -1. And usually the numbers are a lot bigger than that, but just because I'm the only person who's on this world right now, my ID is -1. Now you can use your ID in a lot of things, but I won't show you right now. I just want to show you that. But also another built-in thing, you can see it right here, is this position, yeah? This pose, you don't do the whole word, and then it'll tell you the coordinates of not the player, but it'll tell you the coordinates of the block that you're clicking. And you might be like, well, that's not very useful, but you can, like, for an example, you can make a block generate 2 blocks above that, and then if you copied the code block and pasted it somewhere else, it would still be 2 blocks above that block. But I've never used this position before of the block. You can work around it, but in some scenarios it's just nice to have something extra, and I use my ID all the time, as you are going to see. So messages in the chat, messages anywhere. That is what I'm going to show you right now, and it's probably going to take a bit because there's lots of ways to send messages. Now this was obviously the first way, just using the API.log, but that way is not very good because it like shows log and it's not like as good as a normal chat message. So what you can do is API.sendMessage. And if you're wondering, this is in the Bloxd API, so you can see it here too. But what you can do is API.sendMessage. So what this does is it sends a message to a certain player. So it doesn't show it in chat to every single person, but just a player. But now there's going to be, as I showed you before, it's a function, but you're going to have to put who you want to see it. And you have to put the player of the person who you want to see it. The ID of the person. And if you want to make just the person who clicks it display the message, then you can just put my ID. And then in the second parameter is what it's called. In the second area, you can put the message. So basically, this is the ID of the person who's going to show the message to, and this is the message, yeah? And it'll show hello. Now, as you saw before, my ID is just equal to -1. So if I instead substituted it with -1, then it would still show me the message hello. I actually have to put it in quotations, but you pretty much never use the number itself. But that's just useful to know, you know? Even though it's a number, you still put it in quotations for some reason because it just wants to be a string. Now keep in mind, if I leave and rejoin a lobby, my ID will change unless there's no one on the lobby, so IDs are not constant. But something that is constant that I probably should have showed you is a DB. Well, I'll just show you that. Something that is constant that I probably should have showed you is a DB ID, kind of. It's a bit complicated, but if we do API.get DB ID from ID, I don't know if this will work. Actually, it might not be the exact thing. Yeah, let me check. Alright, it's just get player DB ID, okay? Get player DB ID, and what this is the database ID, pretty much. So this is my personal ID, and I don't think you can hack me with that. That would be stupid if you could. Yeah, you definitely can. But it is basically just a string of random letters that is always the same for me. And this can be used in rare scenarios. I actually used it in my ranked Bed Wars, because the only things that stay same for each player when they leave and rejoin is their player name and their DB ID. So I had to use DB ID because player name, you can technically change your name, and then it would ruin a lot of my code, so I just used DB ID. And what I had to do is convert the DB ID into a number, but my ranked Bed Wars was very complex, so I probably won't get into it right now. But yeah, this sends the message, so if I want to do my ID and then I can send the message yo, then this works. You can also add a third parameter, and then you can, in this third parameter, you have to add an object, which is kind of like a type of data, but all you need to know is you put curly brackets, and then you can put different things inside of it. So if you want to change the color, then you can do color, and then you have to do quotation marks, and then red, so the message will appear a different color. And if you wanna, I don't know, font weight, I haven't used like font weight like ever, so this probably won't work first attempt. Usually I would like see the API to see how it works. I actually have no clue how to use font weight. Let me make my code smaller so it's easier to read, kind of. But if I put the font weight, I don't know. I really don't know how font weight looks because I haven't used it before. Maybe just a number. Oh yeah, I made it look skinnier for some reason. I don't know how this works. If I do 1, 2, 3, 1000. Yeah, 1000 is more bold. Okay, I figured out how it works, guys. 1500. Okay, that didn't work. If it doesn't work, then it'll just go to default. I think 1000 might be the maximum. So yeah, I just figured out how it works. 1000, and then 1 is very skinny. So if you just do 1, then it would show skinny, and as you can see, they're different. Now that is basically how you send a normal message, but what if you want to send a message to everyone? So you'd have to do API.broadcast message. And make sure to capitalize the second letter. This is cap sensitive, so if you don't, it will not work. And then you can just type in the message, so let's say 17, and it looks the same as before, Wait, let me just get rid of this because it didn't work. So 7, it looks like exact same as before, but if there's more players on the world, they would be able to see the 17, but not the because this is like broadcasting and this is just sending it to one person, so there's a big difference. And the last thing is send top right helper. So you have to put API at the front of it. I got this from the Bloxd API again. So basically, as the Bloxd API told me, because I just copied and pasted it, is you first need a player ID, and then you need an icon, and then you need the text, okay? And what the icon is, I believe, is just the font. I'm not 100% sure, I think it's just a font, but it doesn't really matter that much. So what I would put here is my ID, and then for the text is whatever message you'd want to say. So 16. It has too few arguments. Okay, bro. Oh, there. You just had to add the brackets there. Yeah, and in these brackets you can put a lot of things. You can do like color, green. You can change the size, all of that stuff. It's just wait. I have to wait a bit for it to fade away, I think. Oh, green is not defined. Oh yeah, I have to put it in quotation marks. So there we go, now it's green, and you can put your text, you can put a lot more text if you want, and that is just messages. I mean, I think there's a few other ways to send messages, but these are the only ways I've used, and you can always check the Bloxd API on your own. Here we go, position and movement. Now I'm not going to talk to you about that much about movement, because I mean, you probably never have to like launch a player in there, and if you do, you can just check out the Bloxd API. But I do definitely teleport players all the time. So it's api.setPosition, okay? And then as with a lot of these functions like set position, you have to put the ID first. And then you have to put the coordinates in this example of where you're going to teleport to. So for an example, I could do 0, 0, 0 as a simple one. You can put the coordinates in an array format like this, where you can just leave them as is. And then this should, teleport me to spawn. And it'll also put me one block under, which is pretty funny. Now there's also a way to change the direction that a player is looking, but I really don't think that that's that important, and you can always just check the Bloxd API on your own. So now health and effects, another important thing, and I'm gonna have to go into survival to test that because I don't have a health bar in creative. But as you'd expect, the name is just api.setHealth, okay? And there is a few interesting things about this. So let's say my ID and then to 50. Now if I go into survival, then it'll just put me on 50 HP. It'll not change my max health. I actually don't know 100% how to change max health, but let's say we set this to 150, right? Now what it will do is it won't really let me do that even if I'm in survival. It'll just put me to 100, and the reason why is because my 150 is bigger than the capacity of the health bar. So if you want to change that, then you have to do something pretty funny. Okay, I literally don't know how to increase your health, unfortunately, but what I can show you is how to get a player's health. So let's say api.getHealth of my ID. So what this will do is just say the health that I currently have. Now I'm in creative, so I'll just say no. But if I go into survival mode, which is the mode that most players would be in, how do I go into survival? Then it'll say 100. Or if I set my health to like lower, if I set my health to 50 using that block, then it will just say 50, of course. Not much to it, and the reason I didn't use api.log, so it just said result 50 in the chat. So if I would have done api.log, it would have said 50, but that doesn't really matter. Yeah, the result function, you don't really need to know about that. It's just something a bit weird, I guess. Now changing blocks. Now let's say you want to change a block or like build a rectangle in Bloxd, which is a very important skill and completely necessary in all Bloxd projects that are like remotely good. All you have to do is api.setBlock. And then what you need to do is put the coordinates of the block, I believe. Yeah, you need to put the coordinates. So let's say 0, 0, 0, and then the type of block that you want, and you have to put it in quotations. So let's say I want it to be bedrock. Now, you know what? I'll just put the chords I'm at right now, because then it's easier to see. 1, but I want it to be at my feet, so I'll just keep it at 0, and then 85. There we go, and then it set the block to bedrock. Pretty easy. By the way, with coordinates, you always round down, so if it was negative 10.5, it would round down to negative 11. Like, because negative 11 is smaller than negative 10.5, you know? Which is a bit weird, so if you're accidentally doing a block 1 over, then that's how you know. And also if you want to set a block rectangle, which is also important, then you just do api.setBlockRec, and you have to use the coordinates in an array now for this one, since otherwise it's just like so many numbers and it doesn't make sense. So let's say you want to turn a rectangle into bedrock. So let's say, and you have to put the coordinates of the corners of the rectangle. It doesn't matter what corners, they just have to be opposite corners. So let's say the first one is 0, 0, 0, and then the other corner is 3, 3, 3. So if I do this, and then teleport to spawn with this one, okay, I'm stuck, then it just made the the 4x4 thing, and you might be like, well, 3 minus 0 is only 3, so why is it 4x4? And it is 4x4, it just goes 1 block down, by the way. And it is because the corners are inclusive, yeah? So like, if this block has a coordinate of 0, then this has a coordinate of 1, 2, 3, so you basically add an extra one. You know what I mean? And you can also set blocks to equal air, and to do that you can just do, of course, air, there we go. So if I teleport to spawn again, yeah, then it's just all air. And you can also set it, one more block that I'll show you that you probably don't know is invisible solid, and I think if I do invisible solid, this is very useful if you're cool, of course. Then yeah, it's like invisible blocks. You can break them in creative, well, not because this is at spawn, and you can't change any blocks at spawn. I can't even place blocks, but normally you can break them in creative, but not survival. You can still place blocks on them in survival, unfortunately. So if you want to make a barrier that people can't break, then that's a bit more advanced, but it's not that hard. It's just a bit weird, you know? So yeah, and I think here you can also, instead of using the block name, I think you can use a block ID too. So let's say I do 4. Oh no, you have to do block ID. Let me just do get block name. You probably don't know what a block ID is, but every single block has a different ID. Okay, that's not a function. Oh, after doing some experimenting, for all IDs you have to put them in quotation marks and not just the number, which is a bit counterintuitive for me because it's not a number. But if I want to set the block rectangle to the block that has an ID of 1000, which I know is green stained glass because I'm a nerd, then it'll turn into green stained glass. And of course you probably don't know what the ID is of every single block, so you can use api.getBlockID, which will tell you the block ID of a certain block, but like that's not that important. You can just read the Bloxd API to see that. Alright, edit inventories and chests. Now there's a lot of commands for these, so I'm not going to say all of them, but I'm going to say the main ones. Now first of all, there's api.clear inventory, which will clear, I think that's actual inventory, clear the inventory of whatever ID you put. So I can put my ID, and then wow, my inventory gets cleared when I click the block. You can also use api.set I cannot spell inventory item slot. I want to say I haven't memorized all of these. First you put your ID and then you put the item slot. So let's say 0, and then dirt, and then how many of that. Okay, that didn't work. And is it just set inventory? Oh, I think it's just set item slot. Okay, that's interesting. It's not set inventory, I think. Yeah, now so it sets 4 dirt into that slot. Yeah, and if it already has 4 dirt, then it won't do anything. And now this is interesting. Spoiler alert, you can put data on this piece of dirt, which is how you can create data that stays when you like leave the lobby or leave code blocks. So basically that's how you make data that just stays, you know. But the data does not stay across lobbies. But that's about, you guys probably don't understand what I'm saying now, but it's a spoiler for later. Yeah, so you can do any index, and if I do something like 46, I don't think it'll work. Yeah, and the reason why it didn't work is because the 46 item slot is my helmet, and you can't equip your helmet with dirt. So you can do wood helmet, I believe. Yeah, it works. So currently I have 4 wood helmets on. Yeah, it doesn't matter. I'll just do 1 because that makes sense. So you can equip yourself with armor and test it out to see the item slots. I think it goes like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. And then I think this is 11. If I had to guess. Oh, 11's there? What? Oh yeah, okay. 10 is like here then. Yeah, 10 is this. And then 11. And then 12. So it goes from bottom right. And then it goes this way, which is weird. Now, what about chests, like editing chests, which is also important, you know? So let's say you have this chest here. Let me write down the coordinates of the chest. So just 59, you have to round down the coordinates. And by the way, the 2 turns into 1 because the chest is 1 block below my feet. And then I do 85, so, no, sorry, 84. So those are the coordinates of the chest. So you can do API.set standard chest item slot. I memorized it because I used it so much. And then you don't have to put the ID because like it doesn't matter about the player. We're talking about the chest. We just have to put the chords and put them in array form. So like add square brackets. And then what you have to do is put the index of the item slot. So if you want to do the top left item slot, then you just have to do 0, because indexes start at 0. Remember, guys. And then the item name, I don't know, gold coin. And then how many? And I think that's it. Yeah, there you go. And you can also add custom attributes and stuff. So let me just show you an example. Custom description. And I learned this from Snuff, by the way. I know how to spell description, right? Custom description. And then since it's in an object in the curly brackets, you have to use this. Coding's a lot of memorization, but once you code a lot, it makes more sense. It's kind of hard to understand why you're doing everything in just like an hour of a tutorial, but I'm gonna try my best. Custom description, law. Oh, that didn't work? What do you mean it didn't work? Oh, I see. You have to put your ID, and that is the ID of who is opening the chest and putting in the gold coins. Now technically I'm not putting the gold coins in the chest, but the game thinks I am, okay? So if someone else was in the chest, it would kick them out of the chest, because it's like, this is telling the game that I opened the chest and put 999 gold coins, but it doesn't really matter. So now if I do this, it should, yeah, it'll give it the description of law. Now custom descriptions aren't that important unless, you know, they sometimes are, you know? Like if you're wanting to code enchants, which I've done for Ranked Bed Wars, you know? Because I made the prod and damage enchant. And the last thing I'm finally at the done, this took a lot longer than I thought it would to make this tutorial, is entities. Now I already told you, you probably already kind of know what an entity is, but for an example, I'm an entity in Bloxd. I'm a player, and that makes me an entity. Pretty much everything in Bloxd that's not a block is an entity, okay? And like, not items in inventory, but an example of entities would be players, of course, mobs, also items on the ground count as an entity. I can't really think of any other good examples, but I think if I like took a fireball and threw it in the air, then that would count as an entity. I'm not 100% sure, but yeah, players and items and mobs are the main entities. So one thing that you can do is get the entity type. So get entity type, and then you have to put the ID of the entity because everyone has an ID. And as I showed you before, my ID is equal to -1, so I can just use -1, but I'll just use my ID. It doesn't really matter. And then if I do this, and then if I want to log this in the chat, then I can just use this, and it'll say that it's a player because that's the type. And also, you can do a API.getEntityType.player. No, I'm sorry. Or whatever. I don't know. I think you might be able to do like myID.type. Whatever. This just works too. So it's equal to player. So if you want to check if an entity is a player, then you can just do this. You can use if API.getEntityType, and then you put the ID. I don't know what ID I would put, but I'll just put -2, and then equals player. Then it would do API.log1. Wait, okay, it expected, oh yeah, because this is supposed to be a string. Why are these always strings? It's tripping me up. So it expected a valid entity ID. Right now, no one on the server has an ID of -2, but if I do -1, that is a player. Now I'm intrigued. If I throw some ice balls and I do -2, it probably still doesn't work. Because like, it would be like 6 or something, I don't know. Wait, why is it negative? Oh yeah, IDs are negative. But you can also use API.get and get player IDs actually. Yeah. And then it'll give you an array of the IDs. And right now I'm the only one online, so it just shows me. Now some other things that you can do that are very important is get entities in rect. Entities in rect. And what that will do is you just put the 2 coordinates of opposite corners of a rectangle, and it'll tell you who is in that array. And I use that in my ranked Bed Wars to see who is in each Bed Wars map and who is in the queue, because my queue is like a rectangle. So I use this all the time. It's very important. Now if I just go to the Bloxd API and do entity, because why not? There's a lot of entities. It comes up 48 times. So you can, yeah, get entity type, which I already showed you. You can apply it in, well, yeah, all of these things are just IDs. So technically they're entity IDs, but I just call them IDs. Oh yeah, and you can do API.getEntityName. So if you want to turn someone's ID into their name, my name is Bedwars Mayhem for an example, then you can do that. So those are like the only entity functions. And remember, you can't, if you're wondering, if some of you are wondering for some weird reason, if you can just do, I don't know, API.get my position, and then you put my ID. Obviously, if I just make up a random function, it will not work. I'm sure that 99% of you guys know that, but I'm not just making these up. These are stuff that are coded into the game and specifically work. All other ones, if you just do random stuff, they're obviously not going to work, if you're wondering. So that's pretty much it for the tutorial. And if you're wondering, you can't really code exactly games with this beginner's tutorial, but you can code some stuff. Like inside your world, you can code like teleports, and like set health, but you can't do anything fancy because this is just a beginner's tutorial. But in the intermediate tutorial, I'll show you guys how to use world code, which is very important. So it's basically like if you want to make generators, shopkeepers, like that's what I did for my ranked Bed Wars, enchantments, all of those advanced stuff. If you want to code pretty much any game, then you're going to need to use callbacks. So next video on my tutorial, if I make another tutorial, I probably will, because I can't just make a beginner's tutorial and call it ends at that. I'll probably show you guys the tutorial and then make code an example game, because I only like showed you how everything works individually, but never like a whole coding project, which is probably bad, because if I don't show you guys how to do a coding project, then you won't know how to like code anything. You'll just know the individual parts, but you won't really know how to put them together. So I hope you guys enjoyed this video. I hope it helped. I know it's probably complicated if you've never coded before, but I mean, you should be able to do the basics now, and I'll see you guys next time.